Summer twilight was descending on Dos Palos, coloring the sky a deep purple. I sat on the porch of my cottage, breathing in the warm air filled with the aroma of ripe apples from the neighbor's orchard. 67 years is a long way to go, but sometimes it seems that everything flew by like a single moment. The mug with the cooled tea stood beside me on a small wooden table that I had made with my own hands 20 years ago. My name is Eustace Callahan, and this cottage is my refuge from everything that happens in the city. I retired 2 years ago, leaving behind 35 years of teaching physics at the local school. It's amazing how quickly my measured teaching schedule was replaced by an even more measured retirement life. I inherited the cottage from my father, a small plot of land with a vegetable garden, an old apple orchard, and a modest but sturdy house. My father was an old-school man, a man of few words, honest and hard-working. Eustace, he used to say, the land will never betray. Then in my youth, I did not understand the depth of his words. Now sitting on the porch and looking at the neat beds of tomatoes, I realized how right he was. In the distance, I heard the rumble of a train. The schedule was 21 hours and 30 minutes. The trains in Dos Palos always ran on time. The way this town is small, predictable, frozen in time. It was this predictability that attracted Miriam and me when we decided to settle here after the wedding. Miriam, it's been 7 years since she's been gone. Cancer took her quickly and ruthlessly, leaving no chance to say goodbye properly. She died in the fall, and every October since then, I have felt inexplicably anxious. Doctors call it seasonal depression, but I know it's a matter of memory. My body remembers the loss even when my mind is occupied with other thoughts. Miriam was an English literature teacher at the same school where I taught physics. We met at a teachers' conference when we were both just over 30. She fascinated me with her ability to find poetry in the most mundane things. "Look at these clouds, Eustace," she said. "They're like the lines of an unfinished poem." I, with my exact scientific mind, saw the clouds as nothing more than a cluster of water vapor. But over time, she taught me to see beauty where before I had only noticed facts. Our son Randall was born 3 years after we were married. A strong, healthy boy with a rebellious temper. "He's just like you, Eustace," Miriam laughed, "just as stubborn." But I knew he wasn't. My stubbornness was quiet, thoughtful, based on a clear understanding of principles and rules. Randall's stubbornness was always loud, demonstrative, aimed at disrupting the established order. I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out my cigarettes, another one of my weaknesses that Miriam had tried unsuccessfully to rid me of. Now, after all these years, I'm not trying to quit anymore. At my age, some habits become a part of you, and giving them up feels like a betrayal of yourself. Taking a drag, I looked out at the darkening garden. Tomorrow I'll have to pick the fallen apples or they'll start to rot. Order and consistency have always been my faithful companions. In the classroom, I demanded clarity and logic from my students. At home, I maintained a well-established routine. "You're too pedantic," Miriam often teased. "Life is not an equation to be solved." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was my need to find logic and order in everything that caused the rift with my son. Randall has always been unpredictable, living in the moment. As a child, this manifested itself in spontaneous decisions and impulsive actions. He might suddenly decide to spend the night in a makeshift hut in the garden, or set off on his bicycle to explore the far reaches of the city without warning. As teenagers, this unpredictability caused constant conflict between us. I insisted on obeying the rules. He sought to break them. I demanded discipline in my studies. He considered school a waste of time. Miriam was always between us, a peacemaker, a translator, able to understand the language of both of us. After her death, that bond was severed. Randall and I were left alone with our differences, without an interpreter capable of finding common ground. He was in his second year of university at the time, studying economics. When he returned to his studies after the funeral, he called less and less often. And when he did, the conversations were short, filled with awkward pauses and reticence. I put out my cigarette on the edge of the ashtray and rose from the chair. My knees crunched protestingly, another reminder of my age. It was cooler inside the cottage. The old refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner of the kitchen. I took out the leftovers from last night's dinner, pasta and vegetables. Cooking for one always turned out to be overkill. a habit from when there were three of us. After heating up the food in the microwave, I sat down at the small dining table. On the wall opposite hung a picture of the three of us on the beach in Santa Cruz. Randall was about 12 at the time. He's smiling, holding a huge seashell. Miriam laughs, her hair fluttering in the wind. I stand beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other holding her straw hat. We were still a real family then, bonded not only by blood, but by something more. A mutual understanding, shared memories, unspoken but palpable love. The last conversation I had with Randall was 3 weeks ago. He called to say he'd proposed to his girlfriend Eloise. I wasn't surprised, and they had been dating for about 2 years. What surprised me was the tone with which he broke the news to me, as if performing an unpleasant duty. "The wedding will be small," he said then, "in a small circle of close friends." I understood the unspoken words. I was not included in that small circle. "Of course I understand," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Congratulations to both of you." After that conversation, we didn't communicate. I didn't know the date of the wedding or the location. Just another episode in our history of estrangement. After finishing my pasta, I cleaned my plate and went out on the porch for a smoke before going to bed. Night had fully taken over, and the stars shone brightly in the cloudless sky. It was at times like this that I felt the loneliness especially keenly. Not the superficial loneliness that could be filled by casual conversation or watching TV, but the deep loneliness of not knowing anyone who truly knew you, remembered your past, shared your memories. When Randall was little, I used to take him to this cottage with me. We planted tomatoes together, picked apples, repaired the old barn. He asked endless questions: why the sky was blue, how airplanes fly, where rain comes from, and I, a physics teacher to the bone, patiently explained to him the laws of nature, rejoicing at his inquisitiveness. Somewhere along the way, we lost that connection. Perhaps it was in his teens when my explanations ceased to be the final truth for him. Or later, when he began to build a life so different from mine, with expensive suits, business meetings, and the constant pursuit of success as he understood it. Eloise, his fiancée, worked as a lawyer for a large company. I had met her only a few times, and each time she gave me the impression of someone who knew exactly what she wanted out of life. There was a cold, calculating quality in her eyes that alarmed me. But Randall seemed fascinated by her. "She's ambitious," he said proudly, "knows how to succeed." Success. That word became a mantra for him. After university, he took a job at an investment firm and was quickly moving up the career ladder. In our rare conversations, he increasingly used terms that were foreign to me: market strategy, investment portfolio, stock quotes. His world became increasingly distant from my world of classrooms, physics experiments, and quiet evenings with a book. I put out my second cigarette and went back into the house. In the small bedroom was a narrow bed made up with an old quilt Miriam had once brought here. Next to it on the nightstand was a stack of books, a lamp, and a photograph of Miriam in a simple wooden frame. In the photo, she is in her early 40s, standing in our garden, smiling, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the fact that maybe Randall was right in his tacit condemnation of my lifestyle. Maybe I really am too conservative, too attached to the past, too incapable of change. Maybe that was the reason for our estrangement. I stayed in a world he had outgrown. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't just that. After Miriam's death, something had snapped in our relationship. It was as if without her we had lost not only the mediator, but the very desire to understand each other. I retreated into my shell of silence and routine, he into a maelstrom of ambition and new relationships. And every year the gulf between us grew wider and wider. 3 years ago, when I turned 64, I decided to rewrite the house in Randall's name. It was the idea of my old friend and lawyer, Killian Noble. In this way, it was possible to avoid high inheritance taxes. Technically, the house belonged to my son, but on the condition that I had every right to live there for the rest of my life. Randall took to this decision with unexpected enthusiasm. "It's a smart financial move," he said then, and I caught a note in his voice that made me wary. As if this wasn't just a legalization of an inevitable inheritance, but some kind of victory in a long-standing confrontation. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I remembered his face as we signed the papers. some shadow of smugness that had flickered and vanished so quickly that I could have written it off as a play on light. But something told me it was real. From that moment on, our relationship became even more formal. Randall would call once a month, as if he were doing his duty, ask how I was doing, talk briefly about his business, and quickly end the conversation. I didn't feel like a father, but like an old business partner who kept in touch out of courtesy. Sleep was not coming. I turned on the lamp and picked up a book from the nightstand, a popular science publication about quantum physics. Reading had always helped me distract myself from troubling thoughts. But today, even complex scientific concepts couldn't capture my attention. My thoughts kept returning to Randall, to his upcoming wedding to which I hadn't been invited, to how far apart we were. I put the book down and turned out the light again. Outside the window, the leaves of the apple trees rustled, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. The familiar sounds of the country night, which usually soothed me, now seemed only a background to my inner restlessness. In the darkness, I reflected that perhaps it was my restraint, my inability to express my emotions openly. That was the root of the problems in my relationship with my son. Miriam often said, "Eustace, the boy needs to know that you love him. It's not enough to provide for him financially and keep track of his grades." But for me, love was always expressed in actions, not words. I thought the nights spent checking his homework, the weekends spent visiting science museums, the careful planning of his education were all expressions of love. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't just my efforts to secure his future that he needed, but the simple words, "I love you, son." With these thoughts, I finally fell into a restless sleep in which Miriam stood in the garden of our townhouse and said something to me, but I could not make out her words because of the sound of the wind in the apple branches. Mornings at the cottage always began the same way, with the birds chattering outside the window and the sunlight streaming through the old curtains. I woke up early, a habit developed over decades of teaching. The old teaching habits didn't let go of me even 2 years after I retired. After making tea, I stepped out onto the porch and looked around my small plot. Apples that had fallen overnight stood out in bright dots on the grass. The leaves that had begun to turn yellow reminded me that fall was approaching. Soon I would have to prepare the cottage for winter, canning the last of the harvest, covering the rose bushes Miriam had once planted, shutting off the water. I sipped my tea and thought about Randall. Our conflict hadn't happened overnight. It had been building over the years, gradually, like a river slowly making its way through the rocks. The first signs of estrangement appeared when Randall turned 14. Before that, despite our different personalities, we'd found common ground. But adolescence changed him, as it changes everyone. The usual adolescent rebellion in his case was intensified by his natural impulsiveness. He began to actively oppose my authority, challenging my every decision, every rule. I remember one night when he came home well past midnight without warning. Miriam was restless with worry, and I sat in the chair by the front door, waiting for his return with the cold fury that was always my response to intense fear. When he finally showed up, he smelled like cigarettes and cheap beer. He was barely on his feet. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to control my voice. "None of your business," he replied defiantly. "As long as you live under this roof, it is my business. Then maybe I should live under another roof." Miriam then stepped between us, mediating as always. "Let's all calm down," she said in the quiet voice that always worked on both of us. "It's getting late. We'll talk in the morning." But there was no talk in the morning. Randall locked himself in his room and then left for school without saying goodbye. In the days that followed, he and I barely spoke, and when we did, our words sounded like gunshots, short, sharp, aimed to wound. Miriam was distressed by our confrontation. "He's just looking for himself, Eustace," she said. "All teenagers go through that. Give him space." But giving space to me meant losing control, and losing control always made me anxious. I was a teacher used to order, to following rules, to clear structure. The idea that my son could do whatever he wanted without consequences went against everything I believed in. Conflicts continued throughout his high school years. We argued about his friends, whom I considered a bad influence, his studies, which he neglected in favor of partying, and his future, which he refused to plan for. Each argument left a new scar on our relationship, a scar that never fully healed. To my surprise, in my senior year of high school, Randall suddenly picked up his mind. His grades improved, He started disappearing less at night. He even started talking about going to college. Miriam rejoiced at this change, seeing it as a sign of maturation. I remained wary, expecting it to be temporary. But the change was real. Randall entered a prestigious university on a partial scholarship to study economics. He moved to campus, and our communication became less frequent, but strangely of higher quality. The distance seemed to help us both. Him to gain the independence he craved, me to learn to respect his choices. The first 2 years at the university went relatively smoothly. Randall came home for vacations, talking about his courses and his new friends. Miriam was happy to see the gap between us gradually narrowing. I, too, began to hope that the worst was over, that my son had finally found his way. And then the irreparable happened. Miriam fell ill. The diagnosis was relentless, an aggressive form of cancer with metastasis. From the first symptoms to her passing was only 4 months. 4 months that turned my confidence in the future to ashes. Randall returned from university to be with his mother in her final weeks. He sat by her bedside, holding her hand, talking about his plans, how he was going to become successful so she could be proud of him. Miriam listened to him with the same love she had always listened to both of us, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew our fragile world would shatter after she was gone. At the funeral, Randall held himself aloof. He didn't cry, didn't accept condolences, stood to the side, staring off into the distance. I tried to approach him, to find words of comfort, but what could I say? I myself was crushed with grief, unable even to realize that Miriam was gone. The evening after the funeral, when everyone had gone, it was just the two of us in a house that was suddenly too big and empty. Randall sat in the kitchen, twirling a cup of untouched tea in his hands. "Are you going back to university?" I asked, not knowing where to start the conversation. "Yes," he answered quietly. "Classes have already started. I took a sabbatical for a month, but I can't stay longer than that." "Of course, I understand." "Studying is important." He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something new. Not just the usual challenge, but deep, fundamental frustration. "It's always studying, isn't it? Always a schedule, always responsibilities. Even now." "Randall, that's not what I meant." "It doesn't matter what you meant. It's what you said that matters. It's always more important what's said than what's meant. Didn't you teach me that?" He stood up, leaving his cup on the table, and walked out of the kitchen. The next day he left for university, and from that moment our relationship changed definitively. Calls became infrequent. Conversations became superficial. On vacations, he preferred to stay on campus or go to a friend's house. In those rare moments when he did come home, there was an invisible wall between us. We talked about the weather, about the news, but never about what really mattered. Never about Miriam, never about our pain, never about how her absence had changed us both. After graduation, Randall took a job with an investment firm in a neighboring town. His career quickly took off. He possessed that combination of ambition, intelligence, and ruthlessness that is highly prized in the financial world. Our meetings became even more infrequent. He called at Christmas and on my birthday, sometimes stopping by for a quick lunch if he was in town on business. During these meetings, I noticed him changing outwardly. Expensive suits, fancy haircuts, the confident demeanor of a man who knows what he wants out of life. But internally, he remained a mystery to me, a book written in a language I did not understand. About a year after he started at the company, he called me with the news that he was dating a girl. Eloise was a lawyer specializing in corporate law. They had met at some business conference and, he said, felt an immediate connection. "She's amazing, Dad," he said then. And in his voice I heard the excitement that had long since disappeared from our conversations. "Smart, driven, understands my world." "Sounds wonderful," I replied, pleased by his enthusiasm. "I'd like to meet her." "Sure, we'll arrange something," he promised. But I sensed doubt in his tone. The meeting didn't take place until 3 months later, when their relationship had already become serious. Randall brought Eloise over for Sunday lunch. I cooked a roast from Miriam's recipe, trying to make a good impression. Eloise was exactly as I had imagined her from my son's stories, an elegant, confident woman with a sharp mind and a cool smile. She politely praised my home, my cooking, asked the right questions about my work and hobbies. But behind that impeccable politeness, I sensed an appraising gaze, as if she was estimating the value of every item in my home. During lunch, the conversation turned to my retirement, which was due in a year. "Do you plan to stay in this house after you retire?" Eloise asked, carefully cutting the meat on her plate. "Yes, of course, sir," I replied. "This has been my home for 30 years. All my memories are here." "Memories are wonderful," she said with the same cold smile. "But sometimes change is necessary. Many people your age prefer something more compact, less onerous in terms of maintenance." "My father is doing a great job with this house," Randall interjected, but without much confidence in his voice. "Right, Dad?" "Absolutely," I confirmed, feeling suddenly irritated. "And I don't plan on making any changes in the near future." Eloise only nodded, but something resembling disappointment flashed in her eyes. Or maybe it was irritation, the same kind I was feeling. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about the encounter. It was clear that Eloise had considerable influence over Randall. He looked at her with the same admiration that he had once looked at me when I explained the laws of physics to him. But unlike my explanations, which should have broadened his understanding of the world, her influence seemed to narrow his perspective to one goal: financial success. Meetings with Eloise became regular, though infrequent. Each time, I noticed Randall falling more and more under her influence. His speech, mannerisms, even his outlook on life slowly transformed to her standards. He started talking about proper investments, asset optimization, and long-term financial strategies. Phrases I was sure came from her. One day, about a year after they met, Randall arrived alone. It was unusual. The last few months they had always appeared together as a unit. I made tea and we sat down in the living room. "Eloise thinks you should consider retitling the house to me," he said without preamble. "From a tax optimization standpoint, it makes sense." I set my cup on the table, trying to hide my surprise. "And since when did my tax optimization issues become Eloise's concern?" Randall looked confused, but only for a moment. "She cares about our shared future, Dad. About your well-being, too. If the house is in my name, it will relieve you of some of the tax burden, and there won't be any complications with the deed when you inherit." "Upon inheritance," I repeated, feeling strangely bitter. "Is that what you're thinking of already?" "Don't be silly," he set his cup next to mine irritably. "This is about sensible planning. You're nearing 65. It's time to think about these things." "About my death, you mean?" "About your financial security," he exclaimed. "Why do you always make things so complicated? This is a simple business decision that benefits us both." We looked at each other across the table, and I suddenly realized how much strangers we had become. My son, whom I had taught to value knowledge above material possessions, now spoke of my house as a financial asset that needed to be optimized. "I'll think about it," I finally said, more to end this unpleasant conversation than out of any real intention to follow his advice. He nodded, clearly satisfied with my answer, and turned the conversation to more neutral topics. But the idea he, or rather Eloise, had planted remained in my mind. The next day I called my old friend Killian Noble, who worked as a lawyer. We had known each other since our college days, and I trusted his judgment. "Your son's offer makes sense, Eustace," he said after hearing my story. "From a tax standpoint, it could indeed be beneficial. But I'd recommend including a clause in the contract guaranteeing your right to live in the house for life." "You think that's necessary?" Wayne and I asked, surprised by his suggestion. "Better to be overinsured," he replied after a brief pause. "After all, this is your only home." In his voice I heard the same worry I felt myself, but couldn't quite articulate. A worry that there was more than a concern for tax optimization behind Randall's offer. For 2 weeks I pondered the issue, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of putting my house even formally in someone else's hands was something I instinctively resisted. It was the house where Miriam and I had spent most of our lives together, where Randall had been born and raised, where every corner held memories of our family history. But there was another side to it. Randall was my only son, my heir. Sooner or later, this house would pass to him anyway. And as Killian pointed out, legally the offer made sense. In the end, I agreed to the deed, but with one condition. The contract must clearly state that I would have the right to live in the house for life. Randall accepted the clause without objection, which put my doubts to rest a bit. The day of the signing of the papers was a strange one. We met in Killian's office. Randall, Eloise, myself, and Killian himself as my attorney. The atmosphere was more like a business transaction than a family decision. Eloise read every line of the document carefully, occasionally consulting Randall in whispers. I just sat back and watched my house pass from my hands to my son's, on paper, but no less real. When all the papers were signed, Randall shook my hand as if we had just closed a successful deal. Thanks, Dad, he said with a smile that seemed too businesslike for me. It's the right decision. I hope so, I replied, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Eloise smiled at me too, the same cold, calculating smile I had noticed when we first met. You can be secure about your future now, mister. Callahan, she said in a tone that should have sounded caring, but instead sounded condescending. After that day, our relationship with Randall became even more formal. He called less often, his visits reduced to a minimum. When we did talk, the conversation revolved around neutral topics: the weather, the news, his work. Never about the house, never about our relationship, never about anything that really mattered. I started coming to the dacha more often, finding here what I could no longer find in a city home: a sense of belonging, a certainty that this place was truly mine. Here I was, not a tenant of my own life, but its full owner. This dasha, a small piece of land with a simple house, became my true refuge. Here there were no ghosts of the past, no reminders of what I had lost. Not only my wife, but also my connection with my only son. Here I could just be an old physics teacher, growing tomatoes and reading science journals, without thinking about how my life had gradually become a story of loss. Twilight at the dasha always came in a special way. The sky would gradually darken, turning deep blue and purple, and then suddenly turn black, studded with stars. In the city, this transition was not so noticeable because of the street lights and tall buildings. Here, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, time seemed to take on a different rhythm, calmer, more natural. I spent the day working in the garden, picking ripe apples and strengthening the fence for the coming fall. Physical work always helped me take my mind off heavy thoughts, gave me that temporary relief that neither books nor television could provide. There was some primal, healing power in working with the earth. When I returned to the house, I took a shower, washing away the dirt and fatigue, and prepared a simple dinner: an omelet with tomatoes and herbs grown here at the cottage. Miriam had once joked that if it weren't for her, I would eat only scrambled eggs and tea. After her death, that joke became a sad reality. My cooking was limited to the simplest dishes, and I rarely bothered to cook anything elaborate unless I was expecting occasional guests. After dinner, I settled into a shabby chair on the porch with a book and a glass of whiskey, another habit I'd developed since Miriam's death. I used to hardly ever drink alcohol, but now a glass or two before bedtime was part of my evening ritual. Nothing excessive, just a way to dull a little the constant feeling of loneliness that was especially acute in the evenings. The ringing of my cell phone sounded unexpectedly loud in the stillness of the evening. I reluctantly set the book aside and looked at the screen. Randall! The name popped up, and my heart squeezed involuntarily. My son's calls always gave me mixed feelings: hope for reconciliation and fear of another disappointment. Hello, Randall, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, Dad. His voice sounded strangely excited, which was unusual for our usually subdued conversations. Is something wrong? I asked, instinctively expecting bad news. Yes, actually, he paused, and I heard a muffled female voice in the background. Eloise, no doubt. I'm calling to let you know that Eloise and I have decided to get married. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? I couldn't hide my surprise. So soon? I thought weddings were planned in advance. Usually they do, but we've decided not to wait. The ceremony will be modest, just the closest friends. I noticed he didn't say family, but decided not to focus on it. Congratulations to both of you. I wish you happiness. Thank you. His tone was oddly businesslike for a man discussing his own wedding. An awkward pause followed, and I realized he wouldn't have called just for this announcement. There's something else I need to tell you, he finally continued. Eloise and I have decided to start a new life. We bought a house in Palo Alto more suited to our lifestyle. That's wonderful, I replied, not understanding where he was going with this. We needed funds for that, so... Another pause. I sold the house. And your car, too. The world around me seemed to freeze. Randall's words echoed in my head, but I couldn't quite make sense of them. You sold the house? My house? Technically, it's my house, Dad. Remember, the deeds were reissued to me 3 years ago. But there's a stipulation about my lifetime residency. My voice sounded oddly detached, like I was discussing someone else's situation. Yeah, about that. Eloise found a loophole in the contract. It turns out that this condition isn't absolute and can be renegotiated if the property is sold to a third party. Just a little legal technicality. A minor legal tweak, I repeated, feeling a wave of anger building up inside. And the car? Was it registered to you? No, but since you don't actually live in the city anymore and spend all your time at the cottage, we decided you didn't need it. The proceeds will go towards the down payment on a new house. I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. When were you going to tell me this? Before or after they put me out on the street? No one's going to put you out, Dad. There was irritation in his voice now. You have a summer house. You said yourself that you prefer to spend your time there, and the new owners have agreed to give you a month to move. How generous of them. I couldn't hold back the bitter irony. Look, it's just business. It's nothing personal. Eloise and I are starting a new life, and we need startup capital. You've always taught me to be independent, to make tough decisions. That's what I'm doing. At that moment, something broke inside me, not with a crash and a bang, but quietly, almost imperceptibly, like thin ice on a spring river. Years of resentment, disappointment, and unjustified hopes crystallized into one realization. My son, flesh from my flesh, had become a stranger to me. A man who could cold-bloodedly rob me of the home in which my entire life had been spent and call it just business. And in that moment, I remembered something important. Something Randall didn't know, something that could have changed the whole situation. I understand, I said, surprised at the sudden calm in my voice. You're right, it's your decision. And I wish you and Eloise happiness in your new life. A silence hung in the receiver. Apparently Randall was expecting a more violent reaction, yelling, accusations that he could use to further distance himself from me, to justify his act. Thank you for understanding, he finally said, clearly confused by my calmness. I'll arrange to have someone help you with the move. Don't worry about it. I took a sip of whiskey, feeling the alcohol burn my throat. I have everything I need right here. Good. Then, I'll see you later. Of course. And Randall. I paused, choosing my words. Okay, but you have a surprise tomorrow. Expect it. What do you mean? There was tension in his voice. I laughed out loud, enjoying the sudden role reversal. Now he was the one who didn't understand what was going on. Dad? What are you talking about? Don't worry, son. All in good time. I'll see you tomorrow at your wedding. But I'm not. I ended the call without letting him finish his sentence. I placed the phone on the arm of my chair and took another sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spill over my body. A strange feeling came over me, a mixture of bitterness, anger, and, strangely, relief. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying for years was suddenly lighter. The phone immediately rang again. Randall's name flashed on the screen, but I didn't answer it. Let him suffer the unknown. Let him feel some of the anxiety he'd caused me by calling. After the fifth ring, the phone went silent. I got up from my chair and went back into the house, feeling a sudden need to act. The small secretary I had brought here when I was young held important documents. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a folder of papers, laying them out neatly on the table. The deeds to the house. Not the house Randall knew, but a different one. A house my son didn't even know existed. Once upon a time, almost 15 years ago, Miriam and I made a decision. Our only child, Randall, was going through a particularly difficult adolescence at the time. Stealing, fighting, drinking. Every week brought a new problem. We worried that if something happened to us, he would squander the inheritance in a matter of months. So we sold our real family home, the big old mansion Miriam had inherited from her parents. We sold it secretly, through a front man, and used the proceeds to buy 2 other properties. The house where we continued to live with Randall, and another that we never told anyone about. The second house was even bigger and better than the first in an upscale neighborhood, with all the amenities. We rented it out through a management company and put the income into a special account. It was our reserve parachute, as Miriam called it, in case Randall never grew up, in case his self-destructive behavior continued. We hoped that we would never use this plan, that in time our son would find his own way, become a responsible person. As Miriam's condition worsened, we decided it was time to tell Randall the truth. But the disease progressed too quickly, and the conversation never took place. After she died, I decided to give my son another chance, to show that I trusted him by putting our house in his name. I now realize that was a mistake. Randall hadn't changed. It was just that his impulsiveness and selfishness had taken on a different form. Not teenage rebellion, but the cold, calculating self-centeredness of an adult. I pored over the paperwork, rereading the terms of the lease. The house had been rented all these years to a solid married couple, a local college professor and his artist wife. They were reliable tenants, always paying on time and keeping the house in excellent condition. The contract was ending next month, and they had already notified the management company that they planned to move closer to the professor's new place of employment. Perfect timing for a change. The perfect moment to reveal my cards. I picked up my phone and dialed Killian's number. Despite the late hour, he answered after the third beep. "Eustace? What's wrong?" There was concern in his voice. I rarely called him in the evening, usually preferring the daytime for business conversations. "Killian, sorry for the late call, but I need your help." I briefly told him about Randall's call and my plans. "Are you sure you want to go this route?" he asked after a long pause. "It could permanently ruin your relationship." "What relationship, Killian?" I grinned bitterly. "He sold the house I live in without telling me. Calls it just business. What other relationship is there to destroy here?" "I understand," he sighed. "What do you want me to do?" "Get all the paperwork ready. I want to show up at his wedding fully armed. Let him know that his business decision has consequences." "Will do," Killian replied. "Meet me in my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock? "Yes, thank you. Also, do you know where the ceremony will be held?" "No, but I can find out. I know someone at City Hall, and they can check to see what marriage licenses have been issued for tomorrow." I'd appreciate it. After talking to Killian, I returned to the porch, bringing a bottle of whiskey with me. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly in the dark sky. I sat down in a chair and poured myself another glass, pondering how it had come to this. When Miriam and I had decided to keep the existence of a second home from our son, it had been a necessary precaution. We hoped that in time he would prove his maturity and responsibility, and then we would tell him everything. Perhaps even give the house as a wedding gift when he found a suitable life partner. But the years passed, and Randall, though outwardly a respectable financier, was still the same selfish teenager, thinking only of his own wants and needs. And then there was Eloise, who only seemed to reinforce his worst traits. I took another sip of whiskey, feeling the alcohol dull the pain of realization. My only son, an extension of Miriam and me, had become a stranger capable of betrayal. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't Randall, but a number I didn't recognize. "Eustace Callahan?" The woman's voice sounded cold and professional. "Yes, that's me. This is Eloise Price, your son's fiancée. I need to clear the air about your last conversation." I felt my lips stretch into a smile on their own. "Hello, Eloise. Congratulations on your upcoming wedding." "Thank you." Her tone made it clear she wasn't interested in pleasantries. "Randall said you mentioned something about a surprise for tomorrow. What exactly did you have in mind?" "Do surprises get revealed in advance?" I asked, enjoying her obvious irritation. "Then it wouldn't be a surprise anymore. Mr. Callahan, let's be honest. If you're planning something that might mar our wedding, I'd rather discuss it now than tomorrow in front of all the guests." "Marginalize it?" "No, you don't. I just want to give the newlyweds a gift. Can't a father please his son on such an important day?" "What kind of gift?" Her voice became strained. "Like I said, it's a surprise. But don't worry, it will be significant. Mr. Callahan, if you think you can somehow interfere with the sale of the house—" No, nothing like that," I interrupted her. "Randall's house is his property now, and he has the right to dispose of it as he sees fit. I fully recognize that." "Then what is this about?" "You'll find out tomorrow, Eloise. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've had a long day, and I'd like to rest." "That's not—" she began, but I had already ended the call. I finished my whiskey and leaned back in my chair, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow would be an interesting day, a day that would change everything. The house Randall didn't know about was in one of the best neighborhoods in the city, a 20-minute drive from our old home. A three-story mansion with a spacious garden, a swimming pool, and even a small tennis court. Miriam and I had bought it when real estate prices were much lower, and over the years its value had increased several times over. The rent has been going into a special account all this time, creating a sizable sum that would be enough to live comfortably for many years. Randall sold the house, which he considered to be the family's sole and main asset, not realizing that it was only the tip of the iceberg. The house he sold to start a new life with Eloise was actually the least valuable of my possessions. Tomorrow he'll learn the truth. We'll find out that by selling my house, he actually denied himself access to a much more significant inheritance. Because after today's conversation, I was determined to change my will to exclude him as an heir. I pulled my worn wallet out of my pocket and extracted a small photograph of Miriam holding the newborn Randall. Her face glowed with happiness, her eyes full of love. I often looked at that picture in difficult moments, finding comfort in it. "I'm sorry, Miriam," I whispered into the night silence, "but you were right about the reserve parachute. I only wish we'd had time to explain to him that the real value isn't in the houses and cars, but in what's behind them: family, trust, love." I carefully returned the photo to my wallet. Tomorrow I'll meet with Killian, get all the paperwork ready, and show up at my son's wedding. Not to cause a scandal or publicly humiliate him, but to show him the consequences of his choices. To make him realize that in life, as in his beloved finances, every action has a price. The house he sold was not what he thought it would be, and tomorrow he would have to learn that bitter truth. Sleep never came to me. I spent the night sitting in a chair on the porch, watching the stars move slowly across the sky gradually changing from blue-black to deep blue, and then to light blue. Sunrise over the Dasha village was always a magnificent sight. The first rays painted the tops of the apple trees a golden color, gradually descending lower, breaking through the foliage, creating a bizarre play of light and shadow. On another day, I would have enjoyed the sight, perhaps even tried to capture it on paper. Drawing was a modest hobby of mine that few people knew about. But today I wasn't interested in the beauty of nature. Randall's call had turned my world upside down, forcing me to make a decision I'd been putting off for too long. At 6 a.m. sharp, I rose from my chair, feeling my muscles stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. Inside the house, I quickly washed my face, shaved, and brewed a strong cup of coffee. Then I pulled my only decent suit out of the closet, the dark blue one with the faint stripe I'd bought for Miriam's funeral. It smelled a little like mothballs, but it looked decent. As I packed, I mentally mapped out a plan of action. First, I had to get back to the city, then meet Killian, prepare all the necessary documents, and find out where and when the ceremony would take place. I wanted to be there, not at the beginning, but at the moment when everything would be ready for the vows. My gift was going to be the highlight of the day. Before leaving, I checked the documents in the folder one more time. The certificate of ownership for the second house, the contract with the management company, the bank statements proving regular rent receipts for 15 years. Everything was in order. The bus from the dacha village to the city ran rarely, only 3 times a day. The first trip was at 7:30 in the morning, and I caught it with plenty of time to spare. Sitting at the window and looking at the passing scenery, I thought about how strange everything had turned out. All my life I tried to be a good father, provided for my family, gave my son a good education, tried to instill in him the right values. And here is the result. He sells my house without even thinking it necessary to warn me in advance. The bus arrived in Dos Palos at 8:45 sharp. Getting off at the central stop, I went straight to the house that, until yesterday, I had considered mine. I wanted to see it one last time before it officially passed to its new owners. The house looked just as I remembered it, 2 stories, with white shutters and a small garden. Miriam had once planted rose bushes along the path to the porch, which I'd continued to maintain over the years. They had already bloomed, but still looked well tended. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the house and suddenly felt a strange sense of relief. This house was full of memories. It was where Miriam and I had spent most of our lives together, where Randall had grown up, where both the happy and bitter moments of our family history had passed. But now, knowing it was no longer mine, I felt an unexpected freedom. It was as if the weight of the past had become a little lighter. Turning away from the house, I headed toward Killian's office. His law office was in a small two-story building on a side street near the center of town. I'd only been there a few times. Killian usually preferred to meet informally, either in a cafe or at my house. The secretary, a young woman with a friendly smile, escorted me to Killian's office without keeping me waiting. Apparently, he had warned her of my visit. Killian Noble was my age, but he looked much younger, trim, with thick gray hair and lively brown eyes. Unlike me, he hadn't retired and was still actively practicing, though he had reduced his workload in recent years. Eustace! He rose from the table and shook my hand firmly. It's good to see you, though the circumstances are not the most pleasant. Thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. For an old friend, you're always welcome. He pointed me to the chair across from his desk. Coffee? I wouldn't say no. Killian pressed a button on his phone and asked his secretary to bring 2 coffees, then returned to our conversation. So, I've made some inquiries. The ceremony will be held at 12 noon at the River Point Hotel. It's a new place on the outskirts of town, very fashionable among the young people. You know what's strange? Randall didn't invite me. Just said he was getting married. Killian sighed. That says a lot about your relationship. But honestly, after what you said about what he did with the house, I'm not surprised. The secretary brought the coffee and removed herself, closing the door behind her. I took a sip and continued. I brought all the paperwork for the second house. I want to make sure everything is legally in order. Killian took the folder I held out and began to scrutinize the contents. I waited patiently, knowing his habit of scrutinizing every detail. Everything is perfect, he finally said, closing the folder. The house is all yours, no encumbrances. The contract with the management company expires in a month, so you can either renew it or occupy the house yourself. The account that the rent goes into is in your name only too. Randall has nothing to do with the property. And the will, I want to change it. Killian looked at me carefully. Are you sure you want to eliminate it completely? That's a big step. Not completely, I shook my head. I don't want to be as ruthless as he is. Let him have the DACA and a small amount of money. But the main property I want to leave to charity. Miriam has always supported the local library and a program to help gifted children from low-income families. I think it would be the right thing to do. Good, Killian nodded. I'll prepare a new draft of the will. Can you come by to sign it next week? Sure. Now about your plans for today. Do you really want to show up at the wedding uninvited and have shall we say a surprise? Yes, I answered firmly. Randall needs to realize that his actions have consequences, that you can't treat your own father as a minor nuisance on the road to a new life. I understand your feelings, believe me. But think again. This is a public conflict that could have unpredictable consequences. Perhaps we should meet with him alone after the ceremony? I shook my head. No, Killian. He made his choice publicly, without consulting me, without thinking about my feelings. Now let him publicly find out the truth. Killian sighed. I can see you're determined. Well, that's your right, but at least let me come with you. If things get out of hand, you may need legal support. Thanks, friend. I was touched by his concern, but I can handle it on my own. This is a family matter, and I don't want to drag outsiders into it. I'm not an outsider, Eustace. I was at your and Miriam's wedding, remember? I baptized Randall. I helped you formalize that second house 15 years ago. I'm part of your history, whether you want me to be or not. I looked at my old friend and realized he was right. Killian had always been there for me in the most important moments of our lives. And now as I prepared for what might be the hardest conversation I'd ever had with my son, his support would be invaluable. Okay, I agreed. We'll go together. Killian smiled. That's good. We still have 2 hours before the ceremony. I suggest we grab a bite to eat at the Old Maple. They still make the best pancakes in town. We left the office and headed towards a cafe we had both known and loved for years. The Old Maple was one of the few places in Dos Palos that hadn't changed much in the last 30 years. The same checkered tablecloths, the same wooden tables, the same aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pastries. At a table in the corner, Killian ordered pancakes with maple syrup, while I limited myself to toast and scrambled eggs. I didn't have much of an appetite, but I knew I needed to keep my strength up for the upcoming confrontation. Remember when we discussed the second house idea? Killian asked, sending a bite of pancake into his mouth. Miriam was against it at first, said it wasn't fair to Randall. Yeah, I nodded, remembering those discussions. She always believed the best in people, especially her son. But then, when he got in trouble with the law once again, she changed her mind. Was it that car theft story? Exactly. Randall was 16 at the time. He and his friends borrowed a neighbor's car for a trip to the lake. The neighbor didn't file a report just out of respect for Miriam, who had once taught his daughter. But this incident was the last straw. Miriam realized that if Randall didn't change after we died, he could squander the entire inheritance in a matter of months. So you decided to create a reserve parachute, Killian nodded. A smart decision, as time has shown. We were hoping we'd never use it, I sighed. That Randall would grow up, become a responsible man, and we could pass the entire inheritance on to him in good conscience. Well, he has indeed matured, but not in the direction you were hoping for, it seems. I finished my coffee and looked at the clock. 11:30. It was time to move out to the hotel. Nervous? Killian asked, noticing my gesture. Not so much nervous as sad. Today was supposed to be a happy day for my son, a day where I proudly sit in the front row, watching him start a new chapter in his life. Instead, I'm preparing myself for a confrontation that could finally destroy our relationship. This isn't your fault, Eustace. Randall made his own choices. I know. But it's still hard to realize that your only child, your flesh and blood, has become such a stranger that he can rob you of your home in cold blood. Killian put a hand on my shoulder. Come on. The sooner we get this sorted out, the better. We paid and walked out of the cafe. The River Point Hotel was on the other side of town, and Killian offered to drive his car. The drive took about 15 minutes. I was silent the whole ride, absorbed in my own thoughts, and Killian, realizing my condition, didn't try to start a conversation. River Point turned out to be a modern glass and concrete building located on the bank of the river, running through Dos Palos. The spacious parking lot in front of the hotel was filled with cars, among which a few expensive models stood out, probably belonging to the wedding guests. Killian parked and turned to me. Last chance to change your mind, Eustace. We can just drive away and decide all this later, in a more relaxed setting. I shook my head. No, I have to do this. We got out of the car and headed toward the hotel entrance. A young man in a strict suit stood at the door, checking invitations. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Are you here for the Callahan-Price wedding? Yes, I replied. I am the father of the groom, Eustace Callahan. The young man checked the list and said with some embarrassment, I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the guest list. I know, I said calmly, but I'm sure my son would love to see me on this special day. Can you let him know I'm here? The guy looked uncertain but nodded and stepped aside, pulling out his phone. Killian and I were left waiting at the entrance. A few minutes later, Randall himself appeared, dressed in an immaculate black tuxedo. His face expressed a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Dad, what are you doing here? I'm here for your wedding, son. Shouldn't a father be present on such an important day? Randall glanced nervously back at the hotel doors, as if afraid someone might hear our conversation. Look, the ceremony's about to start. It's not a good time to… For what? To talk about the fact that you sold my house without warning? Or to give you a wedding present? What gift? There was tension in his voice. You said something yesterday about a surprise. What are you up to? It's nothing big, Randall. I just want to attend the ceremony and give you and Eloise a special gift. What's the big deal? Randall looked uncertain. On the one hand, he clearly didn't want my presence at the wedding, and on the other, a public scandal with the groom's father would be even more unwelcome. All right, he finally said. You can attend. But no scenes, Dad. This is an important day for me and Eloise. Of course, son. No scenes. I smiled as sincerely as I could. And who's the gentleman with you? Randall nodded toward Killian. That's my old friend and lawyer, Killian Noble. You should remember him. He was at your baptism. Randall frowned. A lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer at my wedding? To prepare the gift papers, of course, I continued to smile. Everything has to be handled legally correct. Without waiting for further questions, I moved toward the hotel entrance, and Randall, after a second's hesitation, followed me, gesturing to the security guard that everything was in order. Inside the hotel was as modern and elegant as the outside. A spacious lobby with high ceilings, minimalist design, and a predominance of white and glass. Randall led us into the banquet room, already decorated for the ceremony. Rows of chairs were arranged in front of a small podium, decorated with flowers and silk draperies. The guests were already taking their seats, talking softly. I noticed a few surprised looks directed in my direction. Apparently, some of them were aware of my absence from the guest list. Randall pointed us to seats in the last row, far enough away from the main action. "Sit here, please. The ceremony will begin shortly." He turned and walked away quickly, probably to warn Eloise about the unexpected guests. Killian and I sat down in our designated seats. I looked around trying to assess the situation. There weren't many guests, about 30 people, most of them young men about Randall's age, probably his co-workers and Eloise's friends. I didn't recognize almost anyone, which further emphasized how far we'd drifted apart over the years. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Killian asked quietly, leaning over to me. I placed my hand on the file folder I held in my lap. "Yes, it has to be done. Not for revenge, but for the truth. Randall needs to realize that his actions have consequences." At that moment, the music played, and all heads turned toward the entrance of the hall. The ceremony had begun. The music flowed smoothly through the hall, creating a solemn atmosphere. The guests fell silent. All eyes were directed towards the center aisle. I sat in the last row, tightly clutching the folder with documents, and watched the event with a sense of strange detachment, as if I were a spectator in the theater, not a participant in these events. Randall was already standing at a small podium next to the official who was to conduct the ceremony. My son looked flawless in his black tuxedo, trim, confident, with perfectly styled hair and a slight smile on his lips. Looking at him from the outside, no one would have guessed that only 24 hours ago, he had robbed his father of the roof over his head in cold blood. The traditional wedding march played, and Eloise appeared in the doorway. She looked stunning, a slender figure, accentuated by an elegant white dress. Her hair gathered in an exquisite style, a confident gait. She was strong, purposeful, calculating. Even at a moment like this, she controlled her every movement, her every look. Killian nudged me lightly with his elbow. "Impressive, isn't it?" he whispered. I nodded. "They fit together, that's for sure." Eloise approached the catwalk, and Randall held out his hand to her, helping her up the small steps. They stood side by side, looking at each other with that peculiar expression that is characteristic of lovers, or those who have successfully closed a lucrative deal. In their case, the line was blurred. The master of ceremonies, a middle-aged man in an austere suit, coughed and began to speak about the importance of marriage, about love and mutual respect. A standard speech I'd heard at dozens of weddings in my lifetime, including my own. But back then, standing next to Miriam and looking into her shining eyes, I believed every word. I wondered if Randall believed them now. "Before we proceed," said the master of ceremonies, "by tradition I must ask, is there anyone here who knows the reason why these two cannot be joined in marriage? Let him speak now or be silent forever." This was my moment. I could feel Killian tense beside me, ready for any development. But I wasn't about to interrupt the ceremony. Not like this. It would be too dramatic, too theatrical. My goal wasn't to ruin the wedding, but to reveal the truth. The ceremony continued. Randall and Eloise exchanged vows that sounded sincere, though somewhat shambolic. An exchange of rings followed, and finally the master of ceremonies pronounced them husband and wife. They kissed to the applause of the guests, and I clapped too, though I felt bitterness rising to my throat. After the formal part, the guests began to move to a nearby room where a buffet was set up. I remained seated, watching the newlyweds accept congratulations. Randall looked happy, but occasionally cast concerned glances in my direction. He remembered my surprise and was clearly nervous. "When do you plan to make your move?" Killian asked when the bulk of the guests had already left the room. "Now," I replied, standing up and clutching the folder in my hand. "It's time to wrap this play up." We headed toward the newlyweds, who were still standing at the podium talking to the photographer. Upon seeing us, Randall quickly said something to Eloise, and she turned in our direction. Her smile instantly became strained, her eyes wary. "Mr. Callahan," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming in spite of circumstances." I shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "I couldn't miss my only son's wedding, could I?" "Congratulations to you both." Randall looked tense, his gaze fixed on the folder in my hand. "Thanks, Dad." "Yeah, we appreciate your presence. I brought you a wedding gift." I lifted the folder slightly. "Something special that I'm sure you'll be interested in." Eloise looked at the folder, then at Randall, and then back at me. "That's very nice of you. Perhaps we could talk in a more private setting?" She clearly sensed that my gift wasn't part of their plans and was trying to control the situation. Cleverly. "Sure," I agreed. "Is there a room here where we could talk privately?" Randall nodded. "We've been assigned a small office to prepare for the ceremony. We can go in there." We left the banquet room and walked down the hallway to a small room with a couch, a few chairs, and a coffee table. Eloise closed the door as soon as everyone entered and turned to me with a strained smile. "So, Mr. Callahan, what was the gift you wanted to give us?" I put the folder down on the table and looked at them both. "First of all, I would like to congratulate you once again on your marriage. Starting a family is an important step in everyone's life." "Thank you," Eloise nodded, but her eyes remained wary. "Randall informed me last night that you sold my house and car to secure a fresh start." I spoke calmly, without accusation in my voice. "That was unexpected." Eloise tensed but maintained her professional calm. "Technically, the house was deeded to Randall 3 years ago. It was his property. With the stipulation that I lived there for life," I reminded him. "There was a legal nuance in the deed that—" she began, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "I'm not going to discuss legal technicalities, Eloise. I didn't come here to argue about a house you've already sold. I came to tell you both the truth." Randall frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, the certificate of title for the second house, the one Randall didn't know existed. 15 years ago, your mother and I made a decision. You were going through a difficult period. Stealing the neighbor's car was the last straw. We were afraid that if something happened to us, you'd squander the inheritance in a matter of months." Randall's face contorted with anger. "Is that what this is? You come to my wedding to remind me of my teenage mistakes?" "No, son. I came to tell you what we did back then. We sold our real family home, the big mansion your mother inherited from your parents. Sold it secretly, through front men, and used the proceeds to buy 2 other properties. The house where we continued to live with you, and another that we didn't tell anyone about. I laid before them the title deeds to a 3-story mansion in one of the city's finest neighborhoods." Eloise instantly grabbed the papers and began examining them with professional thoroughness. Randall looked confused. "I don't understand. You're saying you've had another house all this time, and you never told me about it?" "That's exactly right. Your mother and I created an emergency parachute in case you never grew up, in case your self-destructive behavior continued. We rented out this house through the management company and put the income into a special account." I pulled out another document, a bank statement showing regular rent receipts for 15 years. The amount in the account was impressive. Eloise looked through the documents quickly, and I saw her expression change from skeptical to surprised and then to calculating. "We were hoping we'd never use this plan," I continued, "that you would find your way, become a responsible person. After your mother died, I decided to give you a chance to prove it. That's why I put our house in your name, to show you that I trusted you." "And I lived up to your expectations, didn't I?" Randall grinned bitterly. "The first thing I did when I got control of the house was to sell it." "Exactly. You sold the house I was living in without warning me, without consulting me. Called it just business. Proved that your mother and I were right to create this reserve parachute." Eloise pulled away from the paperwork and looked at me. Her eyes read a mixture of irritation and involuntary respect. "So the house we sold," she began, "was the least valuable of my possessions," I finished for her. "The house you sold to start a new life is actually worth about 4 times less than the one you didn't know about." Randall looked at me with an expression I couldn't accurately interpret. Anger, resentment, disappointment. Probably all of the above together. And now you've come to inform us of this? On our wedding day? Is this your revenge? Not revenge, Randall. It's the truth. You made a choice without thinking of the consequences. Now live with them. What do you mean? Eloise asked, and for the first time there was uncertainty in her voice. I pulled out another document, a draft of the new will Killian had sketched out this morning. I've changed the will. The cottage and a small amount of money will be left to you, Randall. But the main property, the second home, and the account with the accumulated rent will go to charity. The local library and the gifted children's program for underprivileged children. Your mother has always supported them. Eloise's face contorted with anger. You can't do that. It's perfectly legal, Killian, who had been silent until then, said calmly. Mr. Callahan has every right to dispose of his property as he sees fit. Randall stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to us. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. Why did you come here today, Dad? He asked without turning around. To humiliate me in front of my wife? To ruin our day? No, son. I came so you both know the truth, to make you realize that your actions have consequences. You decided you could control my life by selling the house I lived in. I'm showing you that I have a choice too. Eloise folded the papers back into the folder and slowly slid it across the table to me. So what now, Mr. Callahan? Do you expect us to beg you to change your mind? Promise we'll make it right? No, Eloise. I don't expect anything from you. You are adults making your own choices. I just wanted you to understand the consequences of that choice. Randall turned toward us, and I was surprised to see tears in his eyes. You've always done this, Dad. Always turned everything into a lesson. Always been a teacher, even at home. Never just a father. His words hit me deeper than I expected. Maybe you're right, Randall. Maybe I wasn't the father I should have been. But I've always acted out of love for you, even if you didn't see it. Love? He grinned bitterly. You call that love? Withholding information from me, not trusting me, and now coming to my wedding with these revelations? And you call what you did love? Selling your father's house without warning? Putting a roof over his head? We stared at each other across the room, two people bound by blood, but separated by a chasm of misunderstanding and resentment built up over many years. Eloise broke the silence, standing up and taking Randall under her arm. I think we'd better get back to our guests. They'll be surprised at our absence. Her voice sounded calm, but I could see her mind working, recalculating, reevaluating, planning a new strategy in light of the information she'd received. Of course, I nodded, gathering the documents back into the folder. I'm not going to ruin your wedding. I've said what I wanted to say, and now I can leave. Leave? Randall looked at me in surprise. You're not staying for the banquet? Why, Randall? We both know you didn't want me at your wedding. You didn't even invite me. I only came to let you know what you needed to know. Now it's done, and I can go home. Home? He grinned. To the house we sold? No, son. To my real home. The one you didn't know about. The tenants are moving out at the end of the month, so I'll have time to get ready to move in. I headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold and turned around. By the way, I do have a wedding present for you. The envelope is in the side pocket of the folder. Eloise quickly opened the folder and pulled out a thick cream envelope. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money. What's this? She asked, clearly surprised. The money I got from the sale of my car, I replied. The very one you sold without my knowledge, Randall. I discovered that it's actually still registered to me. Funny legal subtlety, isn't it? Randall stared at the check with an expression of utter amazement. But, how? I have a legal advisor too, I nodded toward Killian, and he's no less competent than your wife. Eloise flared, but remained silent as she continued to stare at the check. This is my gift to you. Use it wisely. I turned to leave, but Randall's voice stopped me. Dad, wait. We can't break up like this. I turned around, expecting to see anger or accusation in his eyes. But instead, there was confusion there. The confusion of a man whose world had just been turned upside down. How are we supposed to part, Randall? With hugs and promises that things will be different now? We both know it isn't. But we're family. His voice sounded almost childlike. Yes, we are family. By blood, by paperwork, but not in essence. Not in the way we treat each other. You sold my house without thinking about where I would live. I changed my will, disinheriting you. We both made our choices. Eloise looked back and forth at me and Randall, her face expressing a mixture of annoyance and curiosity, as if she were observing an interesting psychological experiment. So what now? Randall asked. We just stop being a family? We stopped being a family a long time ago, son. Even before you met Eloise. Even before I signed the house over to you. Maybe even before your mother died. We were just pretending everything was okay. Maintaining the appearance of a relationship that no longer existed. Randall was silent, but I could see in his eyes that he understood the truth of my words. Understood and accepted it, no matter how bitter it was. Well then, he held out his hand. Goodbye, Dad. I shook his hand, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. Goodbye, son. I wish you happiness. Eloise didn't offer me her hand, just nodded with a slight smile that could mean anything from respect to contempt. Killian and I left the room and headed toward the hotel exit. None of the guests paid us any attention. Everyone was busy with cocktails and conversation, waiting for the newlyweds to show up. Are you okay? Killian asked as we stepped outside. Yeah, I replied, and realized with surprise that it was true. I feel relieved, like I've finally shed the heavy backpack I've been carrying for too long. What will you do now? Spend the rest of my days at the cottage and then move into my real house when the tenants move out. Start a new chapter of life. Killian nodded. Sounds like a good plan. Need help with the move? Maybe. I smiled at my old friend. But first, let's get lunch somewhere. I'm unexpectedly hungry. We headed toward the parking lot, leaving behind the hotel where my son was starting his new life without me. I didn't look back. There was no need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that had to end was over. A strange sense of freedom swept over me. Freedom from expectation, from disappointment, from trying to recover what was irretrievably lost. There was a new life ahead, and I was ready to begin it. I spent another 3 weeks at the dacha, enjoying the last warm days of the passing summer. I harvested the leftovers, preserved Miriam's apple jam, and tidied up the garden for winter. All of these familiar activities seemed special now, as if I was saying goodbye not only to summer, but to a whole era of my life. After the wedding, Randall didn't call. I didn't expect a call, knowing his pride and ability to take offense. Eloise did show up, though. She sent a formal letter through her assistant requesting copies of all the deeds to the second house for legal review. Killian responded in the same formal manner, reminding her that information about my personal property was confidential and could only be released by court order. From time to time, I wondered how they took my revelation after the initial shock had passed. Eloise was no doubt disappointed. Their plan to secure a fresh start for themselves by selling my house had not turned out as they had expected. Instead of receiving my entire inheritance, Randall could now only count on the cottage and a small amount of money. How did my son react? Did he blame his wife for pushing him into this decision? Or did they rally against a common enemy? Me? I didn't know, and frankly, I didn't want to know anymore. For too long, I'd let my relationship with Randall define my emotional state. It was time to let it go. In early October, I received a call from the management company that handled the rental of my real house. The tenants had moved out, and the house was ready for me to move in. I made an appointment with the company manager the next day to tour the house and get the keys. The mansion was in the Hillcrest neighborhood, the oldest and most prestigious part of Dos Palos, built up in the early 20th century with homes of wealthy citizens. Miriam grew up here, in the house she inherited from her parents, which we sold 15 years ago. The new house we had secretly purchased was only a few blocks from the old one, but it was larger and more modern. As I drove up to the house in a cab, Randall had sold my car. Even though it was registered to me, I'd given it to him as a wedding present. Not wanting to complicate an already tense situation, I felt a slight thrill. I had only been here a few times in all 15 years, mostly to deal with repairs or replacements. I had never considered this house as my real home, more like an investment, an insurance policy against unforeseen circumstances. But that's all changed now. The manager of the management company, a friendly middle-aged woman named Chloe Peebles, was waiting for me at the entrance. We exchanged formal pleasantries, and then she led me inside, commenting on the condition of the house and telling me about the recent renovations done by the tenants. The house was beautiful, 3 stories high, with spacious rooms, high ceilings, and large windows letting in lots of light. The professor and his artist wife, who had rented it all these years, kept the building in excellent condition and even made some improvements with my permission. Renovating the kitchen, installing a modern heating system, beautifying the garden. They were very sorry to have to move out, Chloe said as we looked around the master bedroom on the second floor. But the professor was offered a position at a university on the East Coast, and they couldn't refuse. I understand, I nodded. They were the perfect tenants. Please convey my thanks to them if you get in touch. Chloe smiled. I will. They left you a parting gift in the living room on the mantelpiece. We went down to the first floor, and I saw on the mantelpiece a small painting in a simple wooden frame, a landscape depicting the garden of this house in spring bloom. The work was done with great skill and love of detail. Mrs. Nashville painted it especially for you, Chloe explained. She said she wanted to leave a part of herself in this house that meant so much to them. I was touched by the gesture. People I hardly knew showed more warmth and gratitude than my own son. It's a beautiful gift. I'll be sure to write to them and thank them personally. After inspecting all the rooms and checking all the systems of the house, Chloe handed me the keys and a folder of documents, instructions for appliances, contacts for the services that maintain the house, and other useful information. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch, she said lastly. Welcome home, Mr. Callahan. When Chloe left, I was alone in the huge house that was now mine. It felt strange, foreign and familiar at the same time. I slowly walked through the rooms, getting used to the space, imagining how I would live here. A living room with a fireplace and large windows overlooking the garden. A dining room that could seat 12 at a massive oak table. A library with built-in floor-to-ceiling bookcases, empty for now. My book collection was due to arrive from the cottage in the next few days. The kitchen, equipped with the latest appliances, though I doubted I would use all of them, given my modest culinary skills. On the second floor were the bedrooms, the master with an adjoining bathroom and walk-in closet and 3 guest bedrooms. I decided to turn one of them into a study, a place where I could pursue my research interests and write the memoirs I'd long thought about. The third floor was an open space under a pitched roof, with large skylights that let in a lot of light. The previous tenants had used it as a studio. There was still an easel and the smell of paint. I thought I might as well continue the tradition. Painting had always appealed to me, though I rarely found time for it. That first day, I didn't make any changes, just walked around the house, getting used to the idea that it was my home now. In the evening, I ordered dinner from a nearby restaurant and ate on the terrace, watching the sunset over the garden. It was quiet, with only the birds singing in the trees and the muffled noise of the city coming from far away. The next 2 weeks passed in the hassle of moving. My things from the dacha and some of the furniture from the old house, which the new owners agreed to keep until I moved in, were delivered and arranged. I bought a new bed, some armchairs, and a sofa for the living room. I brought plants that Miriam had once lovingly grown in pots from the country house. They would live in the conservatory attached to the south side of the house. Killian helped organize the move and often stopped by to make sure I was okay. One day he brought his wife Ophelia, an energetic woman with bright red hair, who immediately set about revitalizing my house, as she put it. "It's too sterile in here, Eustace," she declared as she looked around the living room. "It needs details that will make this place truly yours." With her guidance, we chose new curtains, several paintings for the walls, including works by local artists Ophelia knew personally, and a variety of little things to create coziness: cushions for the couch, table lamps, vases for flowers. "Men don't realize the importance of these details," Ophelia said, as she arranged framed photographs on the mantelpiece, "but they are what make a building into a home." Among the photos was the one I always carried with me, Miriam with newborn Randall in her arms. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't exclude my son from my life completely. He remained a part of me, a part of Miriam and I's history, even if our paths had diverged. By early November, I was fully settled into my new home. Life gradually fell into place. I woke up early, had breakfast on the terrace, weather permitting, then worked on my memoirs in my study, read or painted in the afternoons, and sometimes met up in the evenings with Killian and Ophelia or other friends I had begun to invite to visit. The new home gave me not only comfort, but also a new sense of freedom. I was no longer bound by the weight of past hurts and disappointments, no longer waiting for a call from Randall that would change everything. I accepted reality as it was and began to build a new life on that foundation. In late November, almost 2 months after the wedding, Randall did call. I was in the conservatory transplanting one of Miriam's ficus trees when the phone rang. When I saw his name on the screen, I felt a strange calmness. No excitement, no fear, no hope. "Hello, Randall," I answered, wiping my hands off the ground. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded unsure, which was unusual for him. "How are you?" "Good, thanks. Getting settled into the new house." "Yeah, I heard you moved." Killian gave me the address. There was a pause, as if he was waiting for me to ask about his life, about his new home, about how he and Eloise were doing after the wedding. But I remained silent, waiting for him to tell me why he'd called. "Listen, Dad." "About what happened," he finally started. "Yeah, Eloise and I have been thinking a lot about it, and we'd like to, well, maybe talk, in person." "About what, Randall?" "About the house, about the will, about us. Maybe we could find some sort of compromise," I sighed. "Compromise on what exactly? In how much you get when I die?" "No, not just that," a note of irritation came into his voice. "It's about how we're going to build the relationship from here on out." "And do you want to build a relationship going forward, Randall? Or are you just trying to minimize the damage?" He didn't answer right away, and I heard more truth in that silence than in anything he'd said. "We could at least try," he finally said. "Eloise suggests we meet for lunch this weekend at River Point. It's on the house," Eloise suggests. Of course it was her idea. I pictured that meeting, the strained smiles, the insincere apologies, the offers of a fresh start, the cold calculation behind them. Randall and Eloise hoped to regain access to my inheritance, and for that, they were willing to feign family reconciliation. "Thank you for the invitation, Randall, but I must decline." My voice was calm and firm. "You and I have different paths now. You've started a new life with Eloise. I've started a new life here. Let's leave it at that." "You won't even try?" There was indignation in his voice. "Do you really want to, Randall? Or are you just carrying out Eloise's plan to regain access to my property?" "That's not fair." His tone became harsh. "You always thought you knew my motives better than myself. Always saw the worst in me." "Perhaps. But your actions have given me no reason to see the best. You sold my house without warning, Randall. Called it just business. What does that say about your true feelings for me?" He was silent, and I realized I'd hit the mark. It really was just business to him, a financial transaction, not a betrayal of his father. "Well, if you change your mind, you know how to contact me," he finally said in a formal tone. "Yes, I do. Goodbye, Randall." "Goodbye, Dad." I ended the call and went back to transplanting the ficus. Strangely, talking to my son didn't cause me any bitterness or regret, just a quiet confidence that I'd made the right decision. Our relationship wasn't destroyed the day he announced the sale of the house, or even the day of his wedding when I revealed the truth about the second house. It was destroyed over years, gradually, imperceptibly, until it reached a point of no return. A week after Randall's call, I received an official letter from Eloise Knott, through an assistant this time, but directly on her law firm's letterhead. She offered to meet to discuss possible options for resolving the family conflict to the mutual benefit of all parties. Typical legal negotiation language that hid not emotion, but cold calculation. I did not respond to the letter. There was no point in continuing this game. In early December, I finally signed the new will in Killian's office. The cottage and a certain amount of money went to Randall, while the main property, the second house and accumulated funds, went to a foundation established to support the local library and a program to help gifted children. Killian was named executor of the will, ensuring that my final wishes would be carried out exactly. "Are you sure you want to go this route?" Killian asked as I signed the document. "It will definitively close the door to reconciliation with Randall. That door has already been closed, Killian, I replied, and not by me. Randall and Eloise are not interested in a relationship with me, but in my property. They've proven that by their actions. Killian nodded. I understand. I just wanted to make sure you wouldn't regret this decision. I won't. I was confident in my words. It's the right decision, both for me and for those who really need help. After signing the will, I felt a final release, as if the last thread tying me to past hurts and disappointments had been cut. I could now fully focus on the present and the future. Life in my new home was becoming more and more comfortable. I found my rhythm, my little joys, reading in a chair by the fireplace on winter evenings, painting in the attic studio, where the light was especially good in the morning hours, walking in the garden, which even in winter retained its beauty. I began to participate more actively in the life of the local community. I joined a club of astronomy enthusiasts, occasionally gave lectures on physics in the local school, helped in the library with the organization of a science club for children. These activities were satisfying and filled the days with meaning. Sometimes, especially on quiet evenings, I would think of Miriam and wonder what she would say about my decision. Would she have approved of what I'd done with Randall? Or would she have insisted on a reconciliation, another attempt to rebuild family ties? I will never know the answer to that question, but I believe Miriam would have understood me. She always saw the best in people, but she was not blind to their faults. And she, of all people, valued sincerity and honesty in relationships. Randall never called again, and I didn't seek to see him. From Killian, I occasionally heard news about his son. His career was flourishing. He and Eloise had bought a house in an upscale neighborhood in Palo Alto, and they were planning to have children. I listened to the news with interest, but without emotional involvement, as if it were about a distant acquaintance, not my only child. Maybe someday our paths would cross again. Maybe time will smooth out the sharp edges and we can meet without mutual accusations and ulterior motives. But I don't expect it. I don't make plans for it. I have learned to live in the present, to appreciate what I have here and now. At the end of December, when the first snow covered Dos Palos with a white blanket, I stood at the window of my attic studio, looking at the winter garden below, and thought about the strange twists and turns of fate. Who would have guessed that the decision Miriam and I had made 15 years ago out of fear for our son's future would end up being my salvation? That a house bought as a reserve parachute would eventually give me not only a roof over my head, but a new beginning? Life is full of ironies and lessons if we're willing to internalize them. I picked up a paintbrush and began to paint the winter landscape outside my window. The white roofs of the houses, the trees covered in snow, the distant hills on the horizon. This was my world now, my home, my life, and I was ready to live it as fully as I could, without looking back, without regretting what couldn't be changed. Some doors close forever, but new ones always open if we have the courage to cross the threshold.